Welcome, everybody, to the Anchor Conversations podcast. It's great to have you here. This is Jason. I'm kind of steering the ship here today because Tyler preached this past Sunday, and so he hands it off to me. I don't know if that's a good thing for you or a bad thing for you. Not totally sure. I sometimes this goes great. Sometimes I kind of derail everything. So I'm hoping that today turns out to be a good time on the podcast, that there is no derailing, and that we can just march forward, talk a little bit about the Beatitudes from this past Sunday, and most importantly, talk to Tyler, who is here with me. Tyler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. You're bringing a lot of energy, so I think it's good for everyone.
Hey, man, this is my subtle way of telling you need to bring more energy. Instead of
Yeah, I'm
just,
not gonna do it. Hey,
instead
we
of
all have our own
just,
style.
instead of just coming to you and saying, "Hey, Tyler, here's the thing, man. Like, when you start the podcast, bring that energy level up." I want to subconsciously bring that into your brain and just have you think like, "Oh, Jason brought a lot of energy. Maybe I should bring a lot of energy." I feel like it's, passive aggressive ways to go about it. Sometimes are most effective.
I feel like if you know anything about me, you know that will be ineffective with me.
Which is why I'm really hoping which is why I'm really hoping that if people are listening to this, they're laughing. If they know you, because that is not the case. No, I'm actually excited about Matthew 5:6. I'm excited about talking to you about this. And sometimes, to be honest, I'm kind of excited about leading this thing. Sometimes you have guest hosts that guest host a podcast. Well, I'm on your podcast. Um, and you're allowing me to host it today. So that's actually why there's a lot of energy going on right now. So
Although we have to admit that if it's my podcast, you have the much better podcasting setup. Like if any one of us is going to be the professional podcaster, it's definitely you over me because right now my mic is sitting on uh
yeah. Pringles
old-fashioned
can.
oats. No, the
Oh,
Pringles can was last week, but we ate all the Pringles. So
so
now
you
the
threw
only
the
thing I could find that would prop it up high enough was old-fashioned oats.
we should probably take a picture at some point of both of our podcast setups. Here's the thing. There it is. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you'll be able to see Tyler's setup. It's definitely, I'm looking at it right now. It says there's 190 calories in that serving from the oat. Is it like just like straight up oatmeal? Is that like
I guess
what is that?
so. I don't really know. I know that it cooks in 5 minutes and it's 100% whole grain and heart healthy. I can tell you that. And that it's
Well,
the exact height I
and
need it to be.
yeah, and I mean, in all fairness, I did a podcast over COVID for a while. Which, by the way, if you haven't listened to, go back and listen to some of those. We had some really good guests on that. It's called Outside Our Walls. But so I got a lot of this stuff from that because I was trying to make it, I had nothing better to do. I was trying to get a good setup so that we could have a good podcast. And you just built a room in your garage. That looks great. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see Tyler's. This is the room in his garage. He's got an air conditioner next to him. It's this really small room, but dude, you're making it work, man. Like I appreciate the effort that's gone into trying to come up with a quiet room to be able to do this podcast. And you know, last week was a Pringles can. This week's an oats can. I'm actually excited to see what next week's going to be. We're going to find out what
Well,
next week.
I think that I'm guessing the oats can will stick because I don't know that anyone's eating these oats, you know?
Oh, so
Um,
when you open them, there's going to be all sorts of bugs in there.
well, I hope not, but
No,
there's
that
definitely
happened.
oats in there. And there were definitely Pringles in the can that I used last week.
There, there was. I saw on the side of that can. We had some oatmeal one time. It was like one of those Quaker Oats oatmeal, like the bags, and we had them for a long time. One day I thought, you know what, could go for some oatmeal. I opened it and poured it in. There were little like mites or something that had
Uh,
gotten in there, and I was like, yeah, it kind of ruined me from oatmeal for a while. So I hope that didn't happen to you.
yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and leave the lid on. I thought about taking it off to check, um, but now I'm
I'm
gonna
not,
leave it on.
I think it's fine. If I see any
As you mentioned, I'm in a small room, so if I were to open this lid and something were to fly out at me, I wouldn't have very many places
that,
to run.
I'm not gonna lie. The sound of that would make this whole podcast. Do it. Let's see. Is anything gonna fly out at you? Make it happen. We all want to know. Here we go. He's opening it up.
Nope, we're clean. We're
Oh,
clean. No bugs. It's actually mostly full too. It's
oh,
probably a new can.
that's disappointing. I was really hoping that we were going to get something fly out at you. And here's my guess. If you're listening to this, um, my guess is you're really hoping someone's going to fly out too. That's just my thought. We do, by the way, at some point we want to probably release to the public the video of the outtake of me getting dual cramps, one in my hamstring and one in my core at the exact same time. This was probably a year ago,
You know what?
and
I was just watching that video last night because I had to do an update on my phone and I didn't have enough room. So it was like, you need to delete stuff. And I was like, what's taking up so much room on my phone? And one of the big videos, of course, I did not delete it, I kept it, was the video of you cramping up during this
oh,
podcast.
everybody, I wish that you could see it. It still makes me laugh every time Tyler every once in a while send it to me or send me a screenshot of it or something like that because it was painful and it happened at the exact same time. My right hamstring cramped up. Like if you wake up in the middle of the night and you cramp, you just all you want to do is straighten everything out as far as you could. And I did that, and then something in my stomach cramped up. And so I had this dual cramp going on and I just couldn't talk. And it was in the middle of the podcast. I think we had to start the podcast over or something. But one of these days, we will release that to everybody so you can make fun of me for it.
It's
It's
beautiful.
fine.
And if you know, if anyone listening to this wants to see it, just ask me. I will generously share
There,
the video.
yeah. I'm sure that you will. I have no doubts that you would do that in a heartbeat. So if you really want to see that, you should ask Tyler. He'll show it to you for sure.
I will.
Um, Cramps aside, trying to think of how to transition from that into this. You
Well,
know who else had?
we're putting a cramp in everyone's day by, wasting their time.
Well, hey, you know what? The reason why, in all seriousness, the reason why I cramped up that day was because I was dehydrated. I was thirsty. And so I was hungering and thirsting for some nutrients. You know what else we should hunger and thirst for? Righteousness. That's what
Well
Jesus
done.
says in Matthew 5:6. And so, which brings me seamlessly to the text from this past Sunday, which was, "Blessed are the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Um, and so we want to just take some time to look back on this past week. Matthew 5:6. Tyler, your big idea was be hungry for holiness, not happiness. Um, Happiness is something that I think it's not wrong to pursue it. We want to pursue being happy, but the question is, where are we finding that happiness? What is our goal in life? And so Clay did a great job of kind of pulling that out and helping us understand it. Um, let me ask this question first. We did have a question sent in that I want to ask, but let me just ask this question first. I want to explore and talk a little bit more about the idea of actually hungering and thirsting after something. You did a good job, I think, early on, just in your sermon, just kind of pulling that out. What does that mean? To be hungry, to be thirsty, and then spiritually, like what might that look like for us? Let's just maybe tease that out a little bit more, maybe even revisit some of that as we get started on this podcast. I'll leave it to you.
I just had an image come to my mind for this, and it would be if you've ever flown over like Phoenix, the Phoenix area, or especially Southern Arizona. I went skydiving when I was 18 in Southern Arizona. And when you fly over, what you see is it really stands out in Phoenix because we don't have much water. Where there are canals or where there are sources of water, you can see like the cities come up around those things. You'll see, especially in Southern Arizona, all the farmland and then like a small town will be right next to the canal. Or, I guess we can call it rivers in Arizona. They're more like streams, but you get the point. Like there's these places of habitation where just throughout time we've set up. Now obviously, with technology we're getting further away from that, but these cities were set up around the water sources because that's where you could tie into that water to grow your crops for food, and you could use that water to drink. And we need those things to survive. They're so important that we set up our lives around the source of water because that leads to the source of food, and that's our source of life. And so I think that's kind of an image for what it means to hunger and thirst for God. It means to recognize um, for 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 the Lord and His righteousness, to recognize that that is my source of life. That more than my job or whatever makes me feel important, or the things that I have, or my family, even more than any of those things, God is where my life is born, and He's the source of my life. And so then everything, family, job, stuff, all of that gets set up around the Lord, around His righteousness, around, like when Jesus says, my food is to do the will of the Father. It's setting up my whole life around the will of the Father and the presence of the Father and the commands of the Father and the glory of the Father. It's setting it all up around that, kind of like cities do around sources of water and food. And so hungering and thirsting is, it's a life that sets everything up around God, because we recognize that is where life comes from. So that's like the broad, kind of experience of that. But then and it's why I shared a couple of Psalms. I love the Psalms for informing, what our heart attitude should look like as we think about hungering and thirsting for the Lord. That Psalm 84, that the heart and the flesh crying out for God, just your whole being longing to be near the Lord, to understand the Lord, to want to be around the Lord and the people of the Lord, like just there's a desire to draw near. I remember when I first became a Christian, I was saved at a Pentecostal church, which meant there was a lot of services. And so we were just always at the church, always. And I was too, even as a young Christian. And there wasn't anything there that was really drawing me there, other than it just felt like this is where God is. So I don't really know much about the Lord. I don't really know much about Christianity or what it means to follow Him. But man, this is where the people who love Him are. The people who told me about Him, they're here. God's there in some way. Like, I just want to be around Him. So I'm just gonna, yeah, I'll go on a Wednesday night to band practice, even though I'm not part of the band. And then eventually I became part of the band, which is a whole nother scary story, because I should not be a part of any band. But
Yeah,
yeah, you
yikes.
just like be around. So yeah, as I think about hungering and thirsting, it is like it's an emotional, kind of investment in this my flesh and my heart cry out for God. But it's also a really practical investment, that my life is just set up around the source of life, because I recognize Him for who He is.
That's good. I mean, I wonder even if we were to do like a little bit of a study on some of like thirsting and hungering. If you would find a lot, I mean, I know you would find a lot of places in the scriptures where it's talking about trees near water. Like Jeremiah has a long verse about that. I mean, Psalm 1's a great one. That's another beatitude, by the way. Psalm 1. Blessed is the man or woman who does not walk in the path of sinners, sin into scoffers. His delight is in the law of the Lord. And on that law he meditates day and night. He or she is like a tree firmly planted by streams of water. And if you're firmly planted by streams of water, then you won't wither. You're not going to die. You're actually going to, even in harsh seasons, you're going to bear fruit. And I think that when Jesus is talking about hungering and thirsting, I think really the bottom line is, when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we're hungering and thirsting in a lot of ways for Him, because that's who He is. He is righteous. He is holy. Like we're looking to be like Him. Um, even maybe even Jesus talking in John about, I'm the vine and you are the branches. I mean, that idea that we take our sustenance in our we grow out of who He is. Like there's something about Him that should keep us well fed and nourished, and we find ourselves in that way. Um, how do you think that looks practically for us as we kind of walk with the Lord? What does it look like for us to hunger and thirst? I mean, you talked about it again at this a little bit on Sunday, but as we think about just finding ourselves rooted in who he is, what might that look like for some of us?
I mean, I like to think about it in, relational language. As far as like if we're going to view um, God rightly as a person, as someone that we can know and be known by, how do you hunger and thirst for a relationship? What is your, if you have someone who you call a friend, um, what does that look like as far as drawing near to them because you want to be around them? Today I got a call from an old friend that I used to be really close with, and we're not close anymore. We haven't talked in actually a few years just because we drifted apart. And he called me and we talked for about half an hour, and I just had the feeling of like, oh my goodness, it is so good to hear your voice. Like it is good for my soul to hear your voice. And he texted me the same thing afterwards. Like, it's just good to hear you, to know you're doing well. And I told him, I said, man, we can't let it go this long. We got to hang out. So I think practically as we think about hungering and thirsting for God, it's just a desire to want to be where the Lord is and do the things he's doing and recognize like God in a relationship with him is not static, it's dynamic, it's ongoing, there's a depth to it. So yeah, I mean, and that's not just like, oh, I need to have my quiet times or whatever. It is that. It is read your Bible, pray, hear from the Lord, speak to him, but it's also what is he up to in the world? You know? Like what is he doing in the world? And I want to be a part of that because I want to be near to him, because I hunger and I thirst for a relationship with him. I want to be close to where he's at. And so that, I shared this from James, that is religion that's pure and undefiled before the Lord is to visit widows and orphans in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Like there should be a real practical desire for us to say, the Lord's near to the brokenhearted. The Lord, which is in the Bible, the Lord loves the widow and the orphan. Man, I want to like really practically, I want to be there because I believe the Lord's there and I love him and I desire nearness to him. So I think it's kind of both a in my, personal life, just, do I want to hear from God? Do I want to be around him? But then also like I want to go and be where he's at in really practical ways. And, so I think like we live in a world of distractions. We live in a world that's increasingly isolating. We are more connected online and yet more lonely than ever as a people. The newer generations are more connected and yet more lonely because there's not proximity. There's kind of a fake proximity. And so, I think that there's just a lot of room there to go, okay, am I really desirous of a relationship with the Lord, or has all the stuff, that's where I was trying to draw out this distinction between being filled with the Lord and being stuffed with all the things. Is all that stuff making it so that I'm not even hungry or thirsty because I'm just binging Netflix again. Like I can't get up and read my Bible because I need to get a certain amount of sleep, which totally understandable. Well, how many hours before you sleep are you watching TV? That's a choice, right? Or yeah, I can't go serve the Lord because I just don't have I don't have any time. How much overtime are you working? Like those are choices that we make. And yeah, I would just wonder, like, if we're gonna hunger and thirst, then that's like, if you're really hungry and someone's saying, "Hey, can you come over and and do something for me?" You go, "I'm gonna get lunch on the way, or I'm gonna stop and eat first because I am starving." Do we have that same mindset with the Lord? Like I am hungering and thirsting for nearness with him. So all the other stuff I want to do is going to come after that. Or it's going to happen within that or whatever it may be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think that as you were talking, it kind of dawned on me that that kind of idea that you're mentioning there, um, even with those practicals that you just used, I think that it hits at our values, all of them as a church, being purposely biblical and joyfully generous, giving of our time, just carving out time and making time and passionately one being together, making the time and hungering and thirsting for that in relationship, being that way and relentlessly outward. As we think about all those four values that kind of they do embody us, and some of them are a little bit more aspirational as we're just trying to grow in some of these areas and continue to move forward. I do think that the time aspect, like it's time spent. John Owen, who was a theologian, British, like 1600s, Puritan, but he said, relationship is fostered over many visits. So when it comes to the Lord, it's just how much are we visiting with him? We have quiet times. That's a spiritual discipline to read our Bible and to pray. Sometimes that can be so abstract for people because it feels like, "Oh, I don't even know what I'm doing." That's okay. At some point, though, I would just ask, if you're not having a specific time set aside, how much time in the day would you say you're visiting with the Lord? If not, then we wonder why, well, I just don't feel close to God. Well, it's not that God isn't close to you. It's that I wonder how many visits you're spending. How much intentional time are you trying to allow the Lord to speak into your life and to spend some time with you? And so I do think that matters as we think about it. Tyler, let me get before we've about a little less than 20 minutes actually here left. Let me get to the question that was sent in. It's a good question, I think, for us to think through. I'm just going to read the question. I'll let you answer it. So that it seemed like there was an emphasis on the doing of righteousness and being holy in front of God over necessarily, or maybe instead of just hungering and thirsting for right relationships with Him and others. And they were just wondering if you could elaborate on the kind of the two facets of that, and in the meaning in the overall context of the Beatitudes. So holiness, and I'll let you sum that up and then maybe answer it, but just wondered what kind of thoughts you had from that.
Yeah, I think the two things, um, you know, doing righteousness and holiness in front of God and the right relationship with God and others, those are two things that we can't split apart, because doing or the relationship with God entails or implies the doing of the righteousness. Like this is Jesus saying, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. And at the same time, he says, in this is life, that you would know the only true God and Jesus Christ, whom he has sent. So you have the knowing and the doing, or you have, a route we certainly could have gone down with this whole concept of righteousness is Abraham, who the Bible says Abraham believed in God and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was a friend of God. And so we think about that in terms of, okay, that's all relational. Well, how do we know that he believed in God and he was a friend of God? Because of what he did. He took his son, his only son, who God promised him, who was born when his wife was barren for 9 decades, and she had a son miraculously. And God told him to sacrifice that son on an altar. And Abraham tied him down and got the knife out and was ready to sacrifice him, which is wild. That's the promised son. Well, that speaks to his belief, his relationship, his friendship with God. If he would have said, "No, Lord, that's a bridge too far. You promised me a son. I can't kill him," it would have revealed a relationship with God that was not trusting, essentially. So we know that he's got this relationship with God because of how he walks it out. It's James saying faith without works is dead. It's all those ideas in the Bible that you have both. You have the relationship with God, which also entails care for others. Jesus sums it up in the two greatest commandments: to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. So that is righteousness. I tried to sum up righteousness. I kind of tried to frame it internally and externally. So it's this internal desire for the Lord's righteousness in your life, and it's an external desire for God's righteousness in the world and others. So love God, love others. That's what it means to be righteous. So those two things, they go hand in hand. You actually can't have one without the other. If you say that I am righteous before God, I am holy before God, and everyone in your life says you're a massive jerk and you're the most unloving person they know, you are not righteous before God. In the same way, if you say, I am righteous before God, and you have great relationships with people, but you don't follow the Lord's commands in your own personal life, you are unholy as far as the commands of the Lord, the moral purity of God, you're not righteous. You have to have both. Righteousness is both things. It's right relationship with God, and the way that plays out is wanting to love him in your actions and your moral purity, wanting to love others as you love yourself, as Jesus says it in the second greatest commandment. So yeah, I don't know if that elaborates on it more than the sermon, but that it's both. You can't have one without the other. You have to have both, and we won't ever perfectly. I mean, this is where the gospel becomes so important because we aren't perfectly righteous before God, and we don't love others like we should. We are totally banking. We are Abraham, totally banking on the faithfulness of God to provide the sacrifice. And God does. God did for Abraham. He provided a ram whose horns were caught in the bushes to be sacrificed. He provides for us in the perfect son who is righteous and who was perfectly loving towards others and still is. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense or if you'd add to that.
I would just say I was gonna, I'm glad you said it at the end because I was gonna say, at least if I don't think any of us are genuinely holy, but the difference is, are we repentant when we're not holy? Are we pursuing holiness? Just to, I don't want anybody to walk away feeling guilty. But this is where it's hard to walk out biblical imperatives. Imperatives meaning the commands of Scripture. Um, Indicatives in the Bible would be truths of Scripture. So the gospel is a truth. It's the reality that God loves us unconditionally. He's forgiven us. We walk in that. And in that, as we are loved by God, he calls us to holiness, which is a command. Be holy as I am holy. Walk in my commandments. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Those would be imperatives. Those would be commands. But they flow out of the reality of who God is and what God's done for us, which is why I think it's really important for us to be studiers of the Lord, because we're going to hold in tension things like God's Hesed. We've talked about, we were in Ruth, his over and above, it doesn't make sense kind of love for us, the one that just goes so far to where Jesus dies on the cross for us and we are saved, and his holiness. So we have these things in the scriptures that seem like they're paradoxical opposites. You have the transcendence of God, meaning the highness, the bigness, the ununderstandableness. We can't fathom who God is. It's this transcendence. And the word eminence with an I, eminence, which means his nearness and closeness and understandableness. Those things we as human beings, we have a hard time grabbing the both of those and putting them together, because for us, if something is so far above us that we can't even grasp it, you try to understand something as basic compared to the Lord, as basic as the universe, which is, I mean, who can fathom the universe? Like, we can't understand the universe. I don't know. I don't know. People try and tell me, or I try and read how big our galaxy is, and you can't understand how big it is, and you realize our galaxy is one of billions. I mean, how do you understand that? So we think about that, and then to think that the furthest of the stars away is understandable, we go, no, it's not, because I can't even, my brain can't understand how far it is, and I can't make sense of it. But that's what God says. I hold the universe in the palm of my hand. And also, I'm with you personally, and I want to have a relationship with you. And our brains kind of explode. But I think as our brains kind of explode, hopefully what happens is worship. And so we mix those two and we marry those two. So this idea of righteousness comes about, I think it does bring the transcendence of God and the imminence of God, the far high above all things, and the nearness together. This word righteousness in the Bible is a super important word. It describes who God is. It does mean, you mentioned this on Sunday, Tyler, but it does mean fair. I mean, the biblical dictionary, that's kind of the Greek dictionary that everybody uses. It's called the BDAG. It's just BDAG. Their definition of this word, righteousness, is fair and equitable dealing, justice. That's the Bible, that's the definition of it, justice. Um, just, righteous, acceptance as righteous. And then there's the verbal tense of it, which would mean to be render, to render right or just, to act with justice, to vindicate, hold guiltless, accept as righteous. So words like justification, we are just before the Lord. We are justified. We are those who have been brought into a right relationship with him through him, is who God is. He is, Romans 3 tells us, he is both he is both just, he is both righteous, that's the word, and the justifier, the righteousness maker, the one that makes righteous. He is just and the justifier. That's who he is. So our like interactions with him and our interactions with others should have an air of righteousness, of holiness is a good word. It's being brought into a right relationship, made right, made holy, guiltless. It's this idea of we when we act justly, they talk about Micah 6:8 to, you know, to act, to do justice, I guess is what it says there in Micah 6. That's what we're called to do. What makes the Lord, we're humble and we do justice to others. That word is just righteousness. It means to walk rightly with the Lord and with each other. It is brought together that we put off an air of, if I could just make a make a really easy, I think hopefully this makes sense, Christ likeness. We are like Jesus. We God sees us as if we've never sinned, always obeyed, just like Jesus. And hopefully when you interact with your neighbors or your church neighbors in the seat next to you, they're like, man, you remind me a lot of Jesus. Because I think we put off this air of justice, and our hearts really are for that, as we go forward. So I think your answer is really good. I think it makes sense. You have anything to add to any of that?
Yeah, and I would just say, like, if the question is, the emphasis on doing versus hungering, I would just say, like, the doing proves the hunger. So, it's like when my kids, they say they're full. They go, hey, or they say, no, they say I'm still hungry. Like, we're done with dinner. They go, Dad, I'm still hungry. Can I have whatever cookies or something? No, if you're still hungry, you can. Normally, our go-to is you can have carrots. You can have a fruit or a vegetable. We always have carrots in the fridge, so you can have carrots. Never mind. Okay, so you're not actually hungry. You know, if you were hungry, you would eat. Or if you were actually hungry, you would eat what I'm offering you. You want something specific, and the doing proves that, right?
Hmm.
Whether or not you feast. And I think the same is true with the Lord. Like we can say, man, whatever. I want to be holy, or I want to follow the Lord. It's probably how we would say, I want to follow the Lord. And I think the Bible would just say, do you? Do you? Um, because the command, and I talked about this a little bit, but like, so culture talks about our right to, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Bible talks about our invitation to take up our cross and follow. So if we're hungry, that's the food. That's the carrots in the fridge. Take up your cross and follow.
Yeah.
So all that to say, the doing, I think, proves the hunger. I think we can look at our lives and actually look at our lives in community, because I think this is where people are really helpful to go, yeah, am I really hungering for God? Someone help me. Someone help me. Look at my what's on my plate. Is Jesus there, or is it just a bunch of junk food or whatever? So I think
It's
yeah,
good.
they go hand in hand.
I wonder if a good maybe a good illustration of that as you were talking is, you know, our body's made up of over half water. Like we have so much water in us that's made with our cells. We need it to survive, our skin, all that kind of stuff. And when we get really thirsty, like if you're out for a run, if you're walking outside, if somehow you're lost in the wilderness for a long time and you come back, you're not really looking for a Diet Coke at that point, you know. It would taste good, but all you really want, if you're genuinely thirsty, is water, because that's what you need. That's what you're made of. Without water, you die. You can't have anything else, because that's what you're made of. That's what's gonna, you know, actually nourish you. So if we're hungry and thirsting, I guess maybe like way to say it is, I think we hunger and thirst for what's inside of us. Um, so if we're hungering and thirsting for righteousness, hopefully that means righteousness is what we're made of. That's what the Lord's done in us. He's changed the inside from a sinfulness to righteousness to look like Him. And so when we're thirsty and we're hungering, we're gonna thirst for what we're made of. And I think that that's an important point you just made. So I just wanted to add that illustration there to it. So
That's a great illustration. I needed that on Sunday.
hey, you can use it. I
Too late
mean,
now,
it's too
man.
late. It's too late. Sorry. I just thought of it, but
All right,
yeah.
next time I preach through a beatitude, I'm using
Next
that.
time, next time you preach Matthew 5:6. Listen,
Yeah.
everybody, we are going to be Matthew 5:7 this week. You know, the verse is simple, I guess. But the application, we're going to try and figure it out. It's about mercy and being merciful. So we'll take a look at it. Grateful for you listening. Tyler, thanks for preaching this past Sunday. Hey, just as a reminder, youth camp is this weekend. So if you're listening to this in real time, please be praying for everybody going to camp. They leave Friday morning. We're going to send out some text messages as we go throughout the days, just so that you guys can be reminded to pray. But we're just trusting that God's going to do work. So please be praying if you're listening to this in real time. If you're listening to this a month from now, you can pray. God will honor those prayers, I think. So let's just be praying. But I'm grateful to have you guys listening. Thank you, everybody. It's been a joy. Looking forward to seeing you on Sunday.
See you Sunday, everyone.
See you, everybody.